Okay, well, first of all, I'd just like to welcome everybody that's out there that's joined us for this evening. It'll be an enormous pleasure to introduce two guests. We're going to be talking to women who are both working really hard in the blues, women with different stories to tell. My friends Lea Gillespie and Debbie Bond. Deb is calling from Alabama, Dan is calling from London. And before we start, because our program is linked to the Paul Oliver Blues Archive of African American music that we have at Brookes, I just have a little clip that our colleague Christian O'Connell has kindly recorded for us, just to introduce that before I move on to our guest.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on women in the blues this evening. I just want to say a few words really about this webinar series and why they exist. So we started a few weeks ago with our first webinar looking at, which included Chris Strackwitz of Ahuli Records, about discussing Paul Oliver's work, particularly in the 1960s in visiting the United States, because essentially these webinars emanate from the work in the collection of Paul Oliver, the blues scholar and writer and researcher, whose collection is now held at Oxford Brookes University, and is allowing us to discuss these subjects now on a kind of semi-regular basis. And this evening's discussion is a really, really important topic, women in the blues and in the history of the blues. And the reason it connects quite well to the subject we discussed at our last webinar, which involved the field work, Paul Oliver's first field trip to the United States to interview and record singers after almost a decade of writing about the music from Britain and analysing records. And the reason this is an important topic is, I think, it's because Oliver's role as a leading scholar of the blues always included and always acknowledged the important role that women played in the evolution of African American music. I mean, he wrote in the introduction to Conversation with the Blues, which is what we discussed last time, that blues is a folk music, the music of the people, and much of its history is folklore, the mixture of truth and belief which must pass for history in an oral and letter tradition. At the time of going to the United States, Oliver was not only just interested in finding singers and finding about the music and the context in which it originated, but he was also very curious and interested in the lives of women singers as well. And he also wrote in that introduction that I was curious to know what became of the women singers and what other traditions of women's blues existed. And in fact, in most of Oliver's publication, his first book actually was a biography of Bessie Smith, the Empress of the Blues. And in his subsequent publications, he was always very careful to discuss the role of women in the evolution of the genre, not only in terms of the boom of the recording industry in the 1920s, but also how that music emanated from the tent shows and the traveling shows, and how people like Gertrude Mulroney were experienced traveling musicians and singers who were very much connected to African American culture. And so I think that's the role of women in the blues in Oliver's work is also present in one of the main features of the collection at Oxford Brookes, which is the interviews with musicians from this field trip of 1960. So people look at Conversation with the Blues, they will see images of people like Victoria Spivey as well, and interviews with women who he encountered on his journey. And I think it's important to think about that as well and remind people of Oliver's work. There are other scholars who have concentrated solely on the role of women in the blues, and probably the most famous of these works was Angela Davis's Blues Legacies in Black Feminism, which examined how singers like Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, and even Billie Holiday were not just entertainers, but they were deeply rooted not only in Black culture, but also exponents of a kind of very clear Black feminist consciousness. And then early signs of that are detectable through the music. And I wonder how much the legacies of that might filter into the conversation this evening. I also just wanted to look ahead to our next webinar after this one. Hopefully there will be many webinars where we discuss the important role of women, but also on the 26th of May at 7 p.m. UK time, we will have our next webinar, which looks at Black musicians in Europe, where we will be joined by musicians Eric Bibb and Michael Roach of the European Blues Association, but also the author of Black Musicians in Europe, Raina Lotz. So I hope you can join us for that too.
Thank you, Christian. I'm sorry you can't be here. It's a very nice link there. And so I'd like to then proceed to a more general link to our guests today. Certainly, both of you, Dana and Debbie, represent really that tradition in some different form, you know, and you've had different careers, and you can talk about that in different ways. And it's interesting that we're also part, this week's webinar is part of the Creative Industries Festival. And I think I was talking to you, Debbie, the other day about the way that the music and rock music is full of people often whining about how they don't get access to this big industry that they want to be a part of. But I don't suppose any of us in our different ways as musicians ever thought about like some kind of career move that we were going into an industry. We just sort of ended up doing some music, which becomes whatever it became for each of us, and that the music is seen perhaps more of a part of a community. Blues music is seldom thought of as part of that same music industry in a lot of ways. So I think it's kind of interesting to put this here as part of the Creative Industries Festival. I certainly think that, you know, that the issue of the history and culture of women in blues is one that's often taken a back seat, not least because of the kind of endless mythologizing about kind of you know, a certain kind of masculinity in the blues, and particularly around guitar players and so on. And we always hear the same old foundational stories about Muddy Waters and Robert Johnson and everything else, not because they're not great artists, but just because they've got promoted in, you know, more central, sometimes perhaps because of the instrumental mystique, and a lot of the time women singers are the most significant, not associated with instrumentalism. Occasionally, you know, we see a Rosetta Tharpe or Memphis Minnie, who's better known as a singer than a guitarist, but she was, you know, if you ask somebody who recorded When the Levee Breaks, they'll say Led Zeppelin rather than Memphis Minnie, who played on the original of that. But you know, so it's interesting that despite that, I found, looking back as a film scholar, that the best movies about blues actually are the ones about women, the Billie Holiday, Ma Rainey, and so on, and Bessie Smith films. So they're at least represented in some forms, you know, these strong women, and often in a more rounded and interesting way. So I think it's one of the reasons I think it's great to be able to talk to you this evening and you know, talk to your particular experiences as women. And both of you, you know, working really hard still. I mean, Dana, I'm amazed that you keep going quite the amount. Every time I contact you, so, well, I'm just getting back from a tour, you know, in Europe, or I don't know, Skegness or somewhere, whatever else you're playing. So that's quite an extraordinary thing. So I'm going to talk to you one at a time, and then obviously you can join in with each other if you wish to add things. And we hope to leave enough time at the end, maybe 10 minutes, for people to field any questions that they might wish to ask either or both of you about things. So if I could just introduce Debbie a little, she can introduce herself perfectly well. Not here to mansplain the blues, but Debbie, I first met you back at the end of the 80s, early 90s, something like that, when you were in Oxford. You were starting out, I guess, then. And since then, I mean, you're originally from California, and but you've made yourself a resident in Alabama. You're very involved in the blues scene there, and you can tell us quite a lot about that. There's a number of people, very interesting people, some of whom, you know, really quite distinguished, you know, Johnny Shineses and people like that, who you became involved with. And but also you're involved in blues educationism. So I'd like to hear about the sort of things you're doing in Alabama on that side of stuff. So I don't know where the best place for you to start out is. Maybe you just say about how you got into the blues. I don't know if you have one of those moments like I kind of had, where I first heard something that I realized was blues later on after the fact, and that really sort of hit me, kind of, you know, sort of epiphany, I suppose. When do you recollect when you first got caught?
Well, I had this very unusual childhood. I'm the daughter of an anthropologist, and so we traveled. You know, I never lived one place longer than 2 years, and in fact ended up in West Africa in my early teens, and had started playing the guitar, and had seen a woman in a campground playing the guitar and singing, and that was my boom moment of, yeah, this is what I got to do. And so and did my first performing in West Africa on the local Sierra Leone 1 TV station. But, you know, it was really, I think I was bombarded, you know, my real father was a preacher. And so I came from a kind of very, I think, low impact of being exposed to very interesting music, to boom, suddenly being in West Africa, hearing everything from Muscle Shoals music, you know, which was being played there at that time, to West African music, high life, very traditional music. And then hearing the blues, you know, actually when I came back in England at that time, and not really knowing anything about the history or, not knowing anything, but just drawn really passionately to American music. Basically ended up coming back to the States, ending up by accident here. And I always was in bands. So I went to college actually in Sussex and Brighton, and was in my first band then, and was constantly playing music. And so as far as really, I think I just, you know, it's like almost feels like my heart led me to all the places I needed to be, and including at the door of Johnny Shines. I arrived here in Alabama, and people told me that Johnny Shines was alive and living here, and very much taken for granted in his own backyard, which so many of these blues players in America, well, here in the South and in Alabama, are taken for granted. And he took me under his wing. And it was really, you know, I didn't even understand the significance of Johnny Shines and his direct connection to Robert Johnson and all these things. It's just been an amazing journey for me personally to live this very firsthand, and then just get my mind blown. And I think I had the courage to do the things that I have done because I think having an anthropologist mother who was, you know, plonked me down, you know, in all these different cultural situations, you know, gave me a lot the guts to just be myself and be here in Alabama as a white young girl, hanging out with the elder statesmen, Black bluesmen, and that whole experience. So that's a roundabout way to answer your question. Yeah. But I really related to some of the things that the dude that introduced everything, you know, and the mythologies of blues origins are really fascinating. And the fact that Alabama blues has so badly been left out of the story. And I think some of these issues are coming to light more and more currently. And I blame just as much the spin doctoring of the blues industry, you know, going back to the folk revival with the emphasis on Mississippi blues, and then following that, blues scholars. But I would say Paul Oliver was a real exception to that. You know, he did recognize the complexity of the story of the blues as not this one man on a front porch playing a diddly bow in Mississippi, and then evolving from that and spreading. You know, that is not the story of the blues. You know, Ma Rainey was one of the earliest people to even sort of be in print, you know, kind of recognize blues as a musical genre. And she was from Georgia. She was actually born in Alabama. And then it's just the little line there, the state line, she moved over to Columbus. And the Toba Circuit, the Theater Owners Booking Alliance, was a huge part of the story of the evolution of the blues. And it was huge in the South, and women were, a prominent role in that story. Bessie Smith was actually born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and so, and again, right on the line to Alabama. So this kind of regional influence on Mississippi has really been a massive detriment to all these other regions and us really understanding the story of the blues. And Alabama still is left off the map. Florida is left off the map. There's some recent books that I wish I could, it's a one about this theater period and the tent show period, which, shows these venues in Florida, and all through Georgia, North and South Carolina. And so, so there's no book on Alabama blues, but it's, I want to do it before I leave the planet. But there's such a rich heritage here, and I feel very blessed to have been here. And it's really the thing that's given me, if I'd been in London, I probably wouldn't have had the guts with, people like Donna Gillespie as my, predecessors, to have, tried to blaze a blues career in England. But, being here, and it was almost like, people just didn't realize what we have here, this rich blues culture. I just followed my heart.
Well, it's interesting, going back to what you were saying about the kind of Mississippi dominance of people's ideas, the mythology of the blues, because obviously one of the things that affected that, and it's one of the things that Oliver wrote about, was that, of course, the patterns of migration meant that artists from somewhere like Alabama end up being identified sometimes with somewhere else. And I know that you became friendly with George Wild Child Butler, and who I did some work with too. And of course, he's from Alabama, but he was basically living up in Windsor, Ontario, and kind of working out of there. And but actually, he had a real country blues origins, down there in Alabama.
Yeah, and his story, I need to find out if Paul Oliver interviewed Big Mama Thornton, but one of my direct links to Big Mama Thornton was through being a good friend of Wild Child Butler, and that he was playing in the streets in Montgomery, Alabama at the same time that Big Mama Thornton was, and they both did shoe shining to supplement their music income. And so there's just this, so many of these great musicians came out of this. This is the indigenous culture. And as far as the economic motivation for playing the blues, this is the music that comes out of this culture, and the hardship and the racism and the oppression and everything else that, is the cauldron that gave birth to this incredible musical art form, which has, impacted the world's music.
And it's interesting that, for all of the kind of spread of the culture, the fascination with it, these kind of movies of mythologize it and so on, and the, much more established culture of people forming and recording and so on in the blues. Nevertheless, I know that at the moment, although you've worked with, you said, a number of distinguished names, including, Johnny Shines, but also Sammy Lay and
Eddie Kirkland,
yeah, and so on. Actually, as far as I can gather from you, you're still working at a very kind of roots level, playing in places that are effectively juke joints, still. So
sadly, the juke joints are dying out. There's so much associated with the proprietors. So the one I played with Willie Kingan for decades, it died when he died. And Gip's juke joint, where I played up until 3 years ago, when Gip died, the place died. And so that particular blues culture, people fought internationally to keep Gip's juke joint alive, because it didn't pass the all the licensing things and because it was his backyard. But we fought to keep it open, and it stayed open until he died. And if a family member had continued fighting for that, but it didn't. So it's rotting as we speak, sadly. But yes, I played a lot of those traditional places, and there's still, great blues players here that are just continuing to do what they do. And, everybody's struggling. It's not easy. It's not easy to make a living doing that. And, but there's some wonderful musicians. Little Jimmy Reed, who's actually, they promote him interestingly as a Louisiana blues man, but he's lived here for the last 40 years. And I play with him regularly, and he'll be touring this summer in England, as I will be.
Yes, indeed. I realize that rather stupidly, I said I was going to play a clip of your recent music and then didn't. So I'm just going to, before we move on, to talk a little bit about your kind of perhaps about the educationalism that you're involved in, which I think is really interesting. I know you're very energetic about that. So I just want to just share the screen again. I'll just play a little extract if I can. Hopefully that came over okay. Sorry, I didn't play that earlier.
That's all right.
But, yeah, I know you've been busy working, writing, recording, and very self-determined in what you're doing at the moment, and I've worked in Muscle Shoals Studios as well, which is pretty cool to say, but perhaps you'd say a bit about the work. I know I can see a lot of stuff you're doing. You mentioned Big Mama Thornton earlier on as an Alabama female singer that you've got a particular project with at the moment, but I've also seen, anybody can see if they look at your website, that you've been involved with all sorts of stuff to do with schools and so on, and that seems to be quite prolific. So are you finding it easy to get traction with that? I mean, are people receptive to it?
It's taken years. I've been doing it since 1995, and it was just a gradual process. I first worked with some musicians, Billy Branch out of Fruitland Jackson out of Chicago, and then kind of forged a blues education program here, founded the Alabama Blues Project, which is the mission is to promote and preserve the heritage here. And I ran that for years, and luckily it's surviving me. And then I'm still out there doing various projects, right? So we've done hundreds, reached thousands of children in schools doing assemblies featuring Black blues front people, teaching about the origins of the blues and its importance as roots music. And then we've had after school programs, which continue. In school residencies, it's just been huge. I'm focusing more in my music, but I do, like I've already done 2 assemblies this year with little Jimmy Reed and Caroline Shines, Johnny Shine's daughter. So the Arts Council in our state has just been phenomenal. If it wasn't for the Alabama State Council on the Arts and their folk life section and their arts and education section, we would be really way behind. But thanks to that, there is a recognition of the Alabama blues culture from that kind of state level, which still feels a little underground. The state tourism people there's a little bit of a flicker, but we need historic markers, we need a museum, we need all these things to really put us on the map like we should be. Currently, I'm working with the Wiregrass Blues Society, which is down around Dothan and Troy. It's kind of the bottom right-hand corner of Alabama, and that's where Ike Zinnerman is from, the musician that actually taught when our man at the Crossroads, Robert Johnson, made his big musical breakthrough. He had been studying with juke joint player from Alabama, and you can check your liner notes if you don't believe me, but that's the historical what we have found. And so, that deconstructs the Mississippi myth very nicely, I think. But anyway, yes, I'm down there doing that, helping them with historical, it's research basically. And we're going to be doing a program next weekend, in fact. And a blues woman is coming in who's kind of made it her thing to do Big Mama Thornton songs. And so she's from down there. So yeah, it just continues. And so I juggle all these aspects of my life from performing. I played last night, doing my own thing, and yeah, just trying to do it all as long as I can.
Do you find that the take up of the kind of projects you're doing, the educationalist stuff, is that crossing over to, I mean, obviously there's a specific African American heritage there that certain communities invested in directly, but you find that's crossing over in the schools to black and white and other.
Well, when I go into the schools that we go to are the underserved schools, which means, just like out in the countryside here, it's like a third world country, and the schools are underfunded and and often predominantly black, most of them mixed. And now we have a lot of Latino kids. It's very diverse, and kids are wide open, and they're just hungry for, get a live band coming into the school. And, I just, they soak it up and they really dig it. Of course, rap is their music of choice often the times, but the elementary, middle school kids are a breeze. It's the high school kids going to get a little bit more set in their ways and a little less open, but I don't think they'll forget what they got to see. Sure,
that's fantastic. I'm gonna move over to talk to Dana in a moment, because I want to leave us some time at the end. It's been terrific to hear about you, particularly this kind of empirical grounding, in the everyday sort of culture in Alabama. And you, as you said, just remind everybody, you are coming over here, and they can access your website and see when you're doing a tour here later in this summer, which I'm supposedly joining in with you at some point, which I look forward to.
Yeah, doing in Oxford.
Drag me out the house at last. So that's good. So thanks, Debbie. Let's start having a little chat with Dana. I think first of all, I'm just going to share the screen so I don't forget this time, and play a clip of an album that Where Blue Begins, the title track from that, which I have to say I like very much, and I was lucky enough to perform on, although not on this track.
Guitar playing, I was.
I do like that one. That's Ed Dean playing on that one, I think. That wasn't one of mine.
Maybe I can't. Do you know? I can't remember. I have to go and look at the cover. But yeah. I know that Mike Vernon and I co-wrote it, which was nice.
It's a great track.
And, yeah. So you're going to ask me some things, Pete?
I'll just say a couple of things about you, in case anybody needs to know. Well, of course, they can find all they need to know in your Frank memoirs that came out recently.
Have you read it?
I have, so don't blush. No, I know you don't, but
no, I don't blush.
I know, no, I mean, there's for those that aren't so familiar, I mean, your career takes in so many things, including the blues music, but also Olympic junior athlete, I think, at one point, and what was that, water skiing, I think, and
not Olympic, by the way. It's water skiing is not in the Olympics because it's a motor-driven sport. You can only be in the Olympics if you don't have somebody else there, and you can't water ski without somebody else pulling a boat.
Okay.
Anyway, but British water, yeah. Anyway, unimportant now.
Yeah, absolutely. But and then you were on the stage in Catch My Soul and Jesus Christ Superstar, and you're in films, and at least one of my colleagues would be very excited to know you're in that Alberto Sordi film, Fumo di Londra. And
well, that's the Italians. He's a huge star in it. He was a huge star in Italy.
Yeah,
but, you know, all the films I did, they're basically things they just wanted cleavage and somebody in chamois leather to rush around and be a cave girl. But that was just a kind of diversion. Music has always been my love. And of course, I come from the early 60s. It was great to listen to you, Debbie, because you're talking about the American side. I, in 1963, aged 14, or I might have even been 13, and I was already learning to play the drums. I ventured into the famous Marquee Club. And there, of course, I fell in love with listening to the Yardbirds, which, of course, spawned, if that's the right word, Clapton. And then we had, from 1962 in England, we had the American Folk Blues Festival. So you'd have Sonny Boy Williamson and, of course, and Muddy Waters and Howling Wolf. And the only one I never got to see live was Howling Wolf. The only one I ever wanted to see live was him. But I saw Muddy Waters when I was in America. But I mean, it was, I could say, British blues that lured me in first. I mean, you know, I was 14 or whatever, 13, and there were this hot music on stage. How could I not fall for it? I was a goner, but of course my voice, my chops weren't strong enough. I went out as a folk singer then, because that folk was in the early 60s. So, you know, I went out strumming my 12-string guitar, hoping nobody would see that I wasn't that good a guitarist, and that maybe they'd notice my cleavage or short skirt, anything to get by. But that's how you learn your craft. And so when I did films and, you know, bonkers, mad musicals, it was just something to fill in the time. But music has always been my thing. And then it wasn't till after the connection with the David Bowie stuff that I'd done, you know, because I'd known him all my life up until 1975, 74, we had the same manager. Then I realized that my career had a sell-by date. How could I carry on going on stage in stiletto heels and low-cut cleavage when, in fact, all I wanted to do was sing the blues? So I then went to the label that I still do a lot of stuff with, Ace Records, lovely Ace Records, probably the most respected of blues labels here. This was 1980, and I said to them, I want to do an album with all the rudest songs I can find from the 20s and 30s and later, like Big 10-inch and Organ Grinder. It's not your organ, but the way you grind. I've always had a dreadfully wicked sense of humor. As you know, Brits are kind of do have a sense of humor. And I said to the boss, I want to do this LP and I want to call it Blue Job. And he said, sign here. And I've been with them ever since, because I recognized a man with a sense of humor. So I fell into a genre of music, a type of blues that I could present great lyrics. I mean, there's no way I'm going to be Coco Taylor, and there's no way I want to copy somebody like Etta James. That's of no interest to me. I do my own style. I don't really play guitar anymore. I might do a bit of kind of boogie, you know, bordello stuff on the piano. But the more I work with great musicians, what on earth do they need me? I can be out front and sell these songs. And so I don't know, I've made, I can't remember how, I've made loads of blues albums now, because I don't think there's many women that do what I do, because most women are probably saner than me and don't want to sing these really kind of rude lyrics and get away with it. You know, I used to love songs like Julia Lee, My Man Stands Out, Big King Size Papa, all with, you know, these are kind of lyrics that I enjoy. There's no way that I can pretend to have come from Alabama or be an American. I'm British through and through. And British blues was huge. I mean, how else would we in the world actually have even known about Chuck Berry until the Beatles did Roll Over Beethoven, or even Howling Wolf with the Stones doing, you know, Little Red Rooster. So, you know, the British actually did a great deal for the blues, as I know that you recognize this, Pete, because I'm sure you came in kind of from the same door. And to try and get hold of American albums in the old days, in the early 60s, wasn't that easy either.
It was well, they were incredibly expensive. I mean,
that too.
You go back to the 1960s. If somebody had an album and they were stupid enough to lend it to you, you held on to it for as long as possible. Trying not to give it back. And that's what that Paul Oliver double album, Story of the Blues, was one of those things that had so many artists, Johnny Shines, for example, on it, that was so important for a lot of us. And all those. Do you remember those Pie R&B label singles, the yellow and red centers with the Howling Wolf on and Chuck Berry and stuff?
Well, I was signed to Pie in the early 60s, but the labels were pink for my genre. Obviously, the blues stuff went out with a different color. But we had Mike Vernon, who had Blue Horizon Records, and he would be the one that would bring in, let's say, your Muddy Waters or your Jimmy Witherspoon or whoever. And, you'd have Keith Richards or Clapton or whatever, just almost kind of groveling at the knees of these black gods, these musical gods, who basically back in America were lucky if they got 20 quid a night for doing a blues gig. They were getting peanuts, and they came over here and they were hailed as heroes, which they were.
Well, Mike played a huge role in that, and going to chess as well, recording over there. And we both obviously worked with him, which was great. And I'd like to get him on this webinar. At some point.
I did 4 albums with him in 4 different decades. So, and he's a lovely guy, and he's just agreed to do Globetrotting with Gillespie, my weekly YouTube thing, where I take weird and wonderful and sometimes famous people and interview them. So I'm going to be doing him in April. In fact, I hope it's written in the book. Yeah.
And you've got an album. Am I right in thinking it's your 73rd album that's coming up or something like that?
Well, I'm recording it on Wednesday because on Wednesday it's my 73rd birthday, and it'll be my 73rd album. However, I mean, God knows how it's going to turn out. It's live. I've only ever done 2 live albums before, and they were a lot of fun. But I don't forget that I did 20 of these of the 72. I'm only at 72. I might not live till Wednesday, in which case I won't have done 73. But I ran the Mustique Blues Festival for 20 years and produced the albums every year. That was to raise money in the West Indies. And so I have 20 albums. I count that in the 72. Plus I count all those kind of rather strange musicals like Jesus Christ Superstar, things like that when they put them out. And I've also made 10 albums in Sanskrit because I love Indian music. And in the old days, in the 60s, people like Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin, or even Clapton, we'd all go and listen to Ustad Vilayat Khan or Ravi Shankar because we loved sitar. So I love Indian music. And for me, Indian music is almost the same as blues. It's music that has to come from a heart. It's not written down. I mean, I can read dots if I have to, but who the hell wants to? The nice thing about blues is you can just feel it and it comes out. So, and the other nice thing about getting older is your voice gets deeper and richer. When I've just had, they're re-releasing my first album from 1966, 67, and I'm sounding really folky. And I mean, I'm about an octave higher. Just the joys of getting older. Well, let's face it, everything drops as you get older, but especially the voice. So, and I've got the voice that I always wanted, but didn't have when I was younger. But I've grown into what I wanted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I get your point about the thing with Indian music and blues music, because they both have microtonality in the singing and in the instrumentation as well. They're not working to kind of the well-tempered Western scale.
No, and it's a thing of spirituality, actually. I mean, I think people forget that blues has a serious spiritual aspect. I mean, I don't mean singing gospels or whatever. It's a basic spirituality, even if you're singing about my man done left me or whatever, the bastard. It's a spirit, you feel it in your heart, and that's what is important. So I do this with my Indian music too, but not many people know about, well, Indians do actually, but it's just another thing I happen to do, which I happen to love. But blues is something that suits my voice so perfectly. But I'm not one of those shrieking Coco Taylor type of blues singers. Or, you know, I had Shamika Copeland a few times on the Mustique Blues Festival, and she's a great blues singer, but I don't sing like that. And I don't copy people. I do what I feel. And if they don't like it, tough. But mostly they do. So I keep working.
Well, don't you just? I mean, I know that you exercise a lot. I mean, you're pretty healthy, you know.
Well, that actually, you know, I'm often asked, how do you keep going in the business, or do you have any advice for young people? And my advice is, A, don't drink. What are you drinking there, Pete?
Oh,
yes.
On camera, water.
Yeah, because actually alcohol screws the vocal cords up. And B, exercise. I have swum every morning for half an hour for the last 30, 40 years, because I happen to live near a swimming pool. But because if your body, which is your machine as a singer, and I'm sure Debbie knows about this is your instrument. Although it's great, you don't have to schlep any bloody drums or guitars or amps around, it has a detrimental side to it, which is if you go out and party, the singer's going to be screwed the next day, because whereas you can have a drummer or guitarist, he's going to be off his rocker and he can still play if he can play, but singers can't sing unless they are in good shape. So that's my advice to anyone, not that anyone's going to listen to me.
But I was saying earlier on that, you know, you still work, as far as I could see, working a hell of a lot compared to me. Everybody is, but but you've got your London Blues Band, you've got your regular outfit that you in London and tour with. I mean, do you mostly take the band with you, or do you pick up with people?
No, I don't actually. Well, yes, I do if it's anywhere in Europe, except for the Germanic speaking countries. Germany, Austria, Switzerland, known in the biz as the gas territories, because there I work with a guy called Joachim Palden, and he started a European band called the Mojo Blues Band, and they're really well known. But anyway, so he broke away from them, and I sang with them until I made a couple of albums with them starting from 1980. And then I had this freak #1 hit in Europe called Move Your Body Close to Me, which sacrilegiously and blasphemously used synthesizers, and they were so pissed off with me. They said, we're not working with you, so I had to leave the blues band. But this hit was a hit. It had Indian-y influences, this Move Your Body Close to Me. And Joachim Palden, the founder of this band, I still work with him, and he's one of these killer boogie piano players.
He is. We did that Big Boy album with him.
Exactly, with Magic Slim and the Teardrops, well, bits of the Teardrops, and John Primer. Well, you know, this weird thing, Germanic territories produce a lot of really good boogie-woogie piano players, but I don't know any great black boogie-woogie piano players. They're probably too busy making money rapping, or they don't want to be constrained to the 12-bar 3 chords thing, but they don't have them over here in England. And I think young people are only interested in playing keyboards rather. You have to play real piano because of the action to make your fingers strong. So we don't have any of them here. So I'm always happy to go over. I'm going to actually be in Vienna in a week's time, where we'll go out on tour again. I tour with him about 3 or 4 times a year. And we have a girl drummer. That's quite nice. She's had something like 7 million hits on YouTube, called Sabina Perker, doing a drum solo. And it's quite nice to work with a woman occasionally, because I could say they're as rare as rocking horse shit, but I'm probably not allowed to swear, and it's too late. It's come out now, but I don't care. But, you know, women are kind of rare in this business, and I have great respect for them, because there's a plus and a minus to it, seeing as we're discussing women in blues, but it can be women in music. The plus is that you're a rarity, so that if people like you and you're any good, they rebook you, because let's face it, it's probably more interesting to watch a woman on stage than some kind of old bloke who's probably in a bad condition. However,
that's an old bloke.
Well, you know what I mean. You know, and there is a company in Germany, they have to be nameless, but they're well known for putting out blues tours, as long as the girl singers have got very short skirts and play guitars. and usually blonde. But the negative
I've seen
thing,
a lot of those lately. Yeah, there seems to be a sudden flourishing of that.
there's always been a lot of them. Perhaps you haven't noticed them. I have noticed them. They occasionally they're out on the. So the good side is that you're a rarity, but the bad side is that you've got to deal with tossers and, you know, idiots sometimes. And what I don't like doing is working with musicians that are drunk. I just can't bear that, because I've been around for so long. I know that if a musician keeps drinking, he's going to lose his edge and he just won't be any good. And, you know, all of us who love music, it's the music that's the important thing. So it's a lifestyle choice. I don't know if that was what you asked me. Probably not. I tend to.
Oh, I don't mind really. It's just, you know, I'm just interested, you know, reflections in general, and actually, yeah, particularly coming from that point of view, being a woman, you know, because I mean, you'll know, because no more than for me, that you spend a lot of time in vans or whatever with a bunch of guys, and the culture is very kind of.
And don't you get great jokes when you're in the vans with in the van with a bunch of guys? What I love really a lot is sitting in studios and producing and mixing. I love all of that. And mostly women don't do that, but I love to do it. And I learned so much from Mike Vernon, you know, that I've got to say that when I'm in studios doing some project or other, you know, I often hear his voice in the back of my head saying, I'll put a bit of tambourine on that. It's a little ching ching that'll bring out the height, the up thing. But, you know, a lot of times people don't take you seriously if you're a woman, because they're already thinking that you want, in our case, me and Debbie, we're poor white trash. It for some eyes, you know, because you have to fight. I always wanted to be on at the Chicago Blues Festival, but I was always told, oh, sorry, no whites there. Of course, they let Bonnie Raitt on, but we have racist in reverse, and then you're female too. But I don't care. I just get on with what I do.
Brilliant. I think that just to get timing, we've got time for some questions. I know because these webinars are working to a fairly strict time thing, because there's other ones.
We get cut off in our prime just when we're getting used to things. And by the way, Debbie, when are you playing in London, and where are you playing? Put those glasses on and have a look. You're not playing at the Temple of Art and Music, are you? Which happens to be the best blues venue in town in London.
Well, I don't even know anything about it. You know, I'm playing the Radford Mill Blues Festival. I'm playing Aberjazz. And then just lots of blues clubs. I'm doing a lot of blues clubs. In Oxford, I'm playing the Bullington, which is also a blues club gig.
Right. Yeah, okay. Well, when you're in London, if you are...
in London, yeah, at the Broomfield Blues. There's a blues thing in a Broomfield Park or something.
Check out the Temple of Art and Music. It's one of the coolest places in town. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
And where are we going to see you playing next, Dana?
I'm at the Temple of Art and Music on Wednesday. You know, with recording with the band. And actually the band I have, apart from Dino Baptiste on piano, who's phenomenal, and it's his birthday as well. So we're like sisters. So we're going to share a mad birthday bash there. But most of the band are the guitarist. One of the guitarists is only 18, and the bass player, and they all come from Guildhall School of Music. They play 2 or 3 instruments, and they're just incredible. So yeah, that's on Wednesday. And then I'm flipping off to Vienna again for 10 days.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. But
who's going to ask us questions?
Hopefully we've got some questions coming in from the chat list.
Debbie, which month are you in London? When are you here?
In August, and I've got dates in August and September.
I'm around in September. I'll look out for you. I'll come and say hi.
Me too. I'll look out for you too.
I'm not in England at all in August. It's usually the 1 month. Actually, it's the best month to be in England because there's a good chance that the weather's nice. Whereas the rest of the months is always a bit iffy, which is an important thing here.
And climate change has helped the weather a lot, unfortunately, in some respects, not the flooding.
Yeah. Well, let's hope we're not all under a nuclear cloud by then.
Well, there is that as well.
Yes, and there's COVID. Everyone I know is getting it back again. I don't know how it is in America. No, I promise not to talk about it. Hush my mouth.
Yeah, we just have to keep on. It certainly makes you treasure each moment, and really, for what it's worth, I have on my new record is called Blues Without Borders, and it has a bunch of songs that are addressing all these things. But yeah,
me too a bit. I just had this album out called Deep Pockets on Ace Records, and I've addressed a few, but kind of subtly, because sometimes if somebody hears an album, let's say 10 years up down the line, the problems that one sang about maybe this week won't mean a darn thing in 10 years time. So
I'm hoping my protest songs will become redundant. I assure you. Sadly, they seem more relevant than ever.
I know, it's a sad. Ask us questions, Pete. Where are they coming in?
I'm just looking to see if anybody's got any questions. Someone.
How does it work?
Darren's saying he's getting a copy of Blues Job for the British Blues exhibition. He says he agrees with Dan.
No, it's Blue Job, not Blues Job. Blue Job.
Yes, sorry, absolutely, yeah.
Anyway,
he agrees with you about sex. Says very much part of the blues, and rather selectively, he says that's reflected in the exhibition. Be interesting to see that.
Right.
Lucille Bogan just got inducted into the Alabama Hall of Fame, and of course, you're probably familiar with her. And she is from Alabama, born in Mississippi, but she lived her life here. But had the famous for the lewdest of lyrics.
Didn't she do Shave 'Em Dry?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. It's one song I haven't ever felt the urge to sing.
What the hell is it really,
Well, it's as abstract as maybe Dust My Broom, let's face it. That's kind of abstract. But as for Shave 'Em, everybody seems to shave everything these days. And as I go swimming and as I'm in the changing room, I don't see a bush anymore. Sorry, Pete. But I mean, all my male friends said, where's the bush? Why do everyone have to look like 12-year-olds? Quick, get us onto a subject before I get obscene.
Why no? I thought you've done very well, actually. I don't know. Anybody got a clean topic they can ask Dana about, or Debbie? It's they're all very shy. They're probably put off by your forthrightness, actually.
Maybe, yes. I'm just so nobody wants to ask us a question. How terrible. Or maybe they don't know how to work the machinery. I certainly wouldn't. I'm going to put my glasses on because there's a sort of list. Oh, I don't know how any of this works.
Anybody with the last chance?
Hello, Uli. I can see my friend Uli. She's up there. Yay! But I can only see 5 people on a thing above.
Oh, here you go. Someone's it's Darren again asking, did you ever meet Chris Barber, and an artist through him? Because obviously he was very instrumental at the end of the 50s, early 60s in bringing over artists, from America as well as playing.
Sadly not. But the name of Chris Barber, of course, won't mean a thing to Debbie Bond. But we were kind of starved in the late 50s, early 60s, and he had his wife, Ottilie Patterson. Wasn't that his wife? Chris Barber? I'm sure it was. It can't have been Humphrey Lyttelton. I get confused. No, it's Chris Barber. Ottilie Patterson used to sing the blues in the old days. And there was another one called Dorothy. What the hell was her name? The old school, the old. No, I sadly never met him. I think he worked a bit with Helen Shapiro, who, of course, had, #1 hits in the very, very early 60s. And like most singers who might have been in the pop world, where do you go to except for the blues? Because you can't go on being some kind of pop twit when you're 50. It's just obscene. It doesn't look good. If you're Tina Turner, you can get away with it, but most women singers can't. So the blues is where you can go out on stage and be that older stateswoman, I should say.
I mean, the following up the Chris Barber thing, Darren says that apparently he brought Muddy Waters over and Rosetta Tharpe and Brunsey, and he's also donated his trombone to the exhibition. And yes, Ottilie was his wife.
Right, so. Thank you. Yeah, I would have loved to have seen Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Didn't you? Wasn't she great, Debbie? She was fabulous.
Did you ever see Big Thornton?
She had the most attitude on an electric guitar I've ever seen from a woman blues player.
Isn't that film where she's singing in it looks like a railway station or something?
Didn't it rain or something like that? I don't know. She was really going at it. Yeah, they used to pose them on railway stations. That was in Manchester, I think, or somewhere bizarre like that. And
probably raining at the time.
they'd either be on the railway station or one of those folk festival things that came over, and they'd be setting up a kind of phony shack in the background or something for.
Well, we were this American Folk Blues Festival that came over. It had every American artist.
Did you see Big Mama Thornton?
I never saw her. No.
She came on some of those tours, the American Folk Festival tours, but I just was curious.
No, sadly not. Sung the song actually, but of course I'm afraid, being poor white trash, I actually also loved Elvis. So
yes,
but, I was 11 or something at the time.
He did better out of her work than
yeah, poor thing.
Yeah, it wasn't, she didn't write the song. I mean, that story in itself is a complicated one. I've just, been researching that, and the record company that recorded her was Peacock Records, and it was actually owned by a Black record company owner, and he is the one that really ripped her off as far as that recording is concerned. And Lieber and Stoller actually had to sue him to get their due. And of course, Elvis Presley was Elvis Presley and had a huge infrastructure behind him, and had the song charted on the R&B, country, all the charts. But it's not a simple story.
No, but in England, sort of 1960 or even 1959 or whenever it was, just around that year, we couldn't get hold of Big Mama Thornton. We had to make do with Elvis because that's all there was. It's only later on that we started to say, hey, where did this great music come from? And the
Brits did, when you were talking earlier about how you were impacted by the blues players in England. Of course, the blues players in England and the rock evolution of rock coming to America really were responsible for opening the doors and making white America look at it, what it had at its own backyard.
Yeah, I agree. I think they said America wised up to what they had. You're so right.
There still need to keep wising up, but because our racism and so on continues, but that made all the difference in the world to Black blues players in America.
Well, I think actually lots of people got to wise up about the blues. When do you see blues on television? Never. I'm furious. I'm a member of, here we got PRS and something called BASCA and the Ivor Novello Awards, all these things that songwriters are members of, and you can get awards for folk, for jazz, for hip hop, for trance, for everything, and never a category for blues. I occasionally write a furious email to somebody. I never get a reply, but I still feel very strongly it's the mother of all Western music, and it's totally overlooked by the mainstream, certainly here in England, and it's probably the same in America.
It is the same, and it stays underground music. I mean, it's phenomenal to me coming over to England to tour regularly. What a wonderful, just grassroots blues culture there is, and all these diehard people who just love the blues, who have these little blues clubs, sometimes kept alive with subscriptions and, whatever they have to do to make it happen. It's just, I really thank goodness for it.
The only good thing about it is that it's never in fashion, so it can't go out of fashion. And if you're, let's say, a huge fan of, it's a bad example, but let's say Taylor Swift, and you're 13, by the time you're 15, you've moved on to greener pastures. But when you're a blues fan, you're a blues fan till the day you're pushing up daisies. So
yeah, it doesn't stop making sense, does it? It's
you just love the blues. Yippee, bring it on. And if other people don't know it, they're stupid.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I'm going to have to wind things up, but in the nicest way. But I say thank you very much to both of you for your very forthright discussions, and thanks for giving up your time and your enthusiasm, which is the other great thing about the culture.
Well, thanks for inviting us, and I hope to come and find Debbie performing somewhere in London.
I have to come find you for sure.
Okay.
Hands across the ocean. Excellent. And so thanks to everybody for joining in. And just before we go, I just must remind everybody that our next webinar is on the 26th of May at 7 o'clock, and the Black Musicians in Europe with Michael Roach, Eric Bibb, both musicians, of course, and Rainer Lotz, the historian. So hopefully some of you will join in for that. And thank you, guys.
Say goodbye. Well, my way of saying goodbye is peace and love and 5-star hotels. Very simple.
Good blend.
Bye, Debbie.
Lovely to meet you. Lovely. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.